In Ristorante Bellagio, the air itself was a currency. It was thick with the scent of white truffle and aged leather, the hushed whispers of men who measured their worth in billions, and the invisible weight of power that settled over the velvet banquettes like a fine dust. Crystal glasses, so thin they seemed to hum with tension, caught the low, golden light from chandeliers that dripped from the ceiling like frozen tears. This was the stage where Chicago's elite performed their lives, and I, Serena Mancini, was one of the stagehands, perpetually hidden in the wings. As a management trainee, my job was to be everywhere and nowhere at once. I was a ghost in a tailored black dress, ensuring the symphony of service flowed without a single discordant note. My ambition burned like a fever. A desperate need to climb out of the crushing six-figure medical debt my family's tragedy had left me. But here, surrounded by casual opulence, I was just another part of the scenery, my dreams as invisible as the hands that polished the silver. Tonight, however, the symphony was off-key. A palpable tension coiled through the dining room, causing waiters to walk a little faster, their smiles a little tighter. The reason was seated at the far corner table, a space usually reserved for the mayor or visiting royalty. Sergio Battaglia. The name was spoken in the kitchen in reverent, terrified whispers. He was a phantom who owned half the city's skyline, a man whose legitimate businesses were rumored to be the pristine white tip of a very dark and deep iceberg. His appearance at Bellagio wasn't a social call. It was a statement of intent. He was not alone. Across from him sat a man with pale, colorless eyes and the brutal physique of a bear stuffed into a silk suit. His name, I'd overheard, was Dimitri. His presence felt alien, colder and harsher than the homegrown danger Sergio exuded. Between them on the table, untouched, sat a single, unlit candle. My task was simple: walk past their table on my way to the wine cellar and confirm, with a subtle glance, that the candle remained unlit, a signal that their meeting was proceeding as planned. As I drew near, their voices dropped to a low murmur. I focused on looking professional, my gaze sweeping the room, yet my ears strained to listen. Sergio spoke, his voice a low baritone that could command armies. He wasn't speaking the clean textbook Italian we taught the staff. It was something else, a dialect, thick and ancient, with words that felt like they were pulled from the earth of some forgotten village. It was the language of my grandmother, the language of lullabies and ghost stories she'd whispered to me as a child, tales of her home in the rugged mountains of Calabria. Il lupo è tornato all'ovile, Sergio said, his voice smooth but laced with steel. The wolf has returned to the fold. He paused, his cold gray eyes fixed on Dimitri. Ma l'agnello si è smarrito. But the lamb has gone astray. It was a code, a test. My blood ran cold. Dimitri's face was a mask of confusion. He understood Italian clearly, but this was something else. He shook his head slightly, his smile strained. He had failed the test. My mind raced. This was a secret I should not know, a language I should not understand. I had to keep walking, pretend I heard nothing but the gentle clink of silverware. But the words had unlocked something deep inside me, a piece of my grandmother, a fragment of a home I'd never seen. And before my brain could stop my mouth, a response, a correction, taught to me in a game of rhymes when I was 5, slipped out in a breathy whisper as I passed. Solo l'agnello che segue il lupo ritrova la via di casa, signore. Only the lamb who follows the wolf finds its way home, sir. The world stopped. The hushed chatter of the restaurant, the distant melody of the string quartet, my own heartbeat, everything fell into a sudden, terrifying silence. Dimitri's head snapped towards me, his pale eyes wide with alarm and suspicion. The 2 guards standing like statues against the wall tensed, their hands dipping inside their jackets. But it was Sergio whose reaction turned my veins to ice. He didn't move, he simply froze. His gaze, which had been on Dimitri, slowly pivoted to me. It was not a look of surprise or romantic wonder. It was the cold, calculating focus of a predator that has just identified an impossible anomaly in its hunting ground. He didn't see a woman, he saw a breach, a security threat, an unknown variable in a deadly equation. With a flick of his wrist, a dismissal, he spoke to Dimitri in clipped English. This meeting is over. There has been a complication. Dimitri stood, his face flushing with anger. What is this, Battaglia? A setup? His eyes darted to me full of menace. Who is she? She, Sergio said, his voice dangerously soft as he rose to his feet, is my business. The Russian threw his napkin on the table. You have bought hours to fix this. Our agreement either proceeds, or it will be signed in blood. He stormed out, his guards trailing him like shadows. The moment he was gone, my manager, Mr. Valenti, scurried over, his face pale with terror. Miss Mancini, what have you done? Who gave you permission to speak to the guests? I'm sorry, I stammered, my mind unable to form a coherent thought. Sergio held up a hand, silencing both me and Valenti without raising his voice. Leave us, he commanded the manager. When Valenti hesitated, Sergio's storm-gray eyes narrowed a fraction. Now! Valenti practically ran. The remaining patrons in the restaurant seemed to collectively decide their dinner was finished. A quiet exodus beginning as Sergio's men subtly but firmly cleared the room. Within minutes, the vast, opulent space was empty. It was just the two of us standing under the glittering chandeliers, surrounded by the ghosts of 100 conversations. He walked towards me, his steps measured and silent on the marble floor. He stopped directly in front of me, forcing me to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. You have a very rare talent, Miss Mancini, he said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. My own grandmother would have struggled to understand that dialect. She was from the next village over. He leaned closer, invading my space, his scent of expensive leather and smoke surrounding me. So I have one question for you. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the fear build. Who are you working for? No one, I gasped, horrified. I swear, my grandmother, she was from Arasi. She taught me. Arasi, he repeated, the name a soft hiss. Recognition and something darker flickered in his eyes. There are only two families left who speak that dialect with that precise accent, mine and the Falcones. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, not as a woman, but as a puzzle piece that did not fit. You just cost me a $10 million deal and put me on the brink of a war with the Bratva. You have made yourself the most interesting and the most dangerous woman in Chicago. He reached out not to touch my face, but to grip my upper arm, his fingers like steel bands. His touch was not a caress, it was an arrest. And now he murmured, his voice dropping so low it was almost a growl, his eyes promising a world of trouble I couldn't begin to imagine. You are my problem to solve. You don't leave my sight until I have my answers. The world outside Bellagio's ornate doors ceased to exist. My protests were swallowed by the silent, efficient movements of Sergio's men. There was no struggle, no scene. I was simply escorted from the grand dining room, through a private kitchen exit, and into the back of a blacked-out Escalade with a finality that felt like a coffin lid closing. The grip on my arm was firm, but impersonal, the touch of a professional handling a volatile asset. Sergio slid into the seat opposite me, the intimate space of the car suddenly feeling vast and cold. Another man was already inside, older, with a face like a weathered rock, and eyes that held a lifetime of brutal pragmatism. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that couldn't hide the hawk-like tension in his shoulders. Rocco, Sergio said by way of introduction, his tone flat. My consigliere. Rocco's eyes raked over me, dismissive and sharp. He spoke to Sergio in fluent standard Italian, ignoring my presence completely. Una spia dei Falcone senza dubbio. A Falcone spy, without a doubt. Dobbiamo eliminarla. Immediatamente. We must eliminate her. Immediately. Dimostra debolezza, tenerla en vida. Keeping her alive shows weakness. Ice flooded my veins. I understood every word. They were discussing my execution as if I were a piece of faulty equipment. Sergio didn't even look at his advisor. His storm-gray eyes remained locked on me, watching for a reaction, a flicker of understanding. I fought to keep my face a blank mask, my terror a roaring ocean trapped behind a fragile dam of composure. È sotto la mia protezione, Rocco, Sergio replied, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of absolute authority. She is under my protection, fino a quando non avrò le mie risposte. Until I have my answers. La tua protezione? Rocco scoffed, disbelief coloring his tone. Questa cameriera ha appena fatto saltare un accordo che abbiamo costruito per 6 mesi. Dimitri vuole il sangue. Your protection? This waitress? She just blew up a deal we spent 6 months building. Dimitri wants blood. Allora Dimitri dovrà aspettare, Sergio said coolly. Then Dimitri will have to wait. He switched to English, his gaze still holding mine. It seems you are causing problems for me already, Miss Mancini. I told you I don't know anything, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. My grandmother taught me. It was just something I heard. Your grandmother, he mused, leaning forward slightly. From Arasi, a village of ghosts and secrets. A village my family and the Falcones have fought over for a century. He studied my face, his expression unreadable. You are either the most accomplished spy I have ever encountered, or the unluckiest woman in the world. For your sake, I hope it is the latter. The Escalade pulled into a silent underground garage, the heavy steel door rolling shut behind us with an ominous boom. We were taken up a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse that was less a home and more a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the glittering expanse of Lake Michigan. The decor was minimalist, cold, and brutally expensive. There was no warmth, no sign of life, only power. I was led to a sprawling living area. Rocco stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, speaking in low, urgent tones on the phone. Sergio gestured for me to sit on a white leather sofa that was as beautiful as it was uncomfortable. He didn't sit. He paced before me like a caged panther, all coiled energy and controlled violence. The deal with Dimitri was for the acquisition of untraceable military-grade hardware. It was the final move that would have given my organization an absolute advantage over the Falcones. Your little poetry recital has not only put that on hold, it has made Dimitri believe I am working with the Falcones to set him up. He is an exceptionally paranoid and violent man. He will now target all three parties. My head swam. I didn't mean to. What you meant is irrelevant, he snapped, the first crack in his icy composure. What matters is what you know. He stopped pacing and stood over me. So we will start again. Who is your grandmother? What was her name? And why did a woman from a village with a population of 200 people, a village sworn to the Battaglia family, teach her granddaughter the secret dialect of our blood enemies? Her name was Nona Rose, I said, the words catching in my throat. She never talked about the Falcones. She only ever said her family had a feud with another family. She left Arasi when she was young. She never went back. The story sounded weak, pathetic, even to me. Convenient, Rocco sneered from across the room, having finished his call. He approached, his predatory eyes fixed on me. Let me get the answers from her, Sergio. My methods are much faster. Back down, Rocco, Sergio warned without looking at him. She has put this family at risk, Rocco insisted, his voice rising. Dimitri's people are already on the move. The Falcones will hear about this blunder within the hour. They will see it as a sign of weakness. They will come for us, and she is the fuse that lit the fire. I said, Sergio turned, his voice dropping to a lethal growl. Back down. The raw menace in his tone made even the formidable Rocco take an involuntary step back. The power dynamic was absolute. In this room, Sergio's word was law. He turned back to me, the fury in his eyes banking to a cold, controlled flame. You see my dilemma, Serena, he said, using my first name for the first time, the sound of it on his lips both intimate and threatening. My enemies want you dead. My allies want you dead. And I am still undecided. You are a loose thread in a tapestry I have spent my life weaving. And I do not tolerate loose threads. He walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to me. My hand was shaking so badly the ice rattled against the crystal. But you are also the only person who can fix the mess you've made, he continued, taking a slow sip from his glass. The man Dimitri was supposed to meet, my contact. He was found dead an hour before my meeting. An execution by the Falcones. They knew about the deal. I stared at him, the horrifying implication of his words slowly dawning on me. The dialect was the final security check, he confirmed, reading my expression. A check my real contact would have passed. A check Dimitri expected. Now, Dimitri is gone, the hardware is in limbo, and the Falcones believe they have won. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. Unless a new contact appears. Someone who can pass the test. Someone who speaks a forgotten language and can convince Dimitri the deal is still on. The blood drained from my face. No, absolutely not. You think you have a choice? A cold, humorless smile touched his lips. I am giving you one. Option A, I hand you over to Rocco. He will get his answers and I will deal with the fallout. It will be unpleasant for you. Option B, you do exactly as I say. You will become my contact. You will meet Dimitri. You will use that clever tongue of yours to save both of our lives. He placed his glass on the table and knelt in front of me, bringing our faces level. His storm-gray eyes were hypnotic, pulling me into their depths. I will train you. I will feed you every word through an earpiece. Your only job is to perform. You are an ambitious woman. Serena, think of this as the ultimate management training. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his touch surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the terrifying proposition he was laying before me. Succeed, and you will have my protection, my real protection. Fail? He let the word hang in the air, the unspoken consequences more terrifying than any threat. This wasn't a choice between life and death. It was a choice between which monster would be the one to devour me. The one standing in front of me, at least, was offering a chance to survive. My voice was a choked whisper. What do I have to do? Sergio's smile widened, a true smile this time, full of triumph and dark promise. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. First, he said, rising to his feet and offering me a hand, you stop being Serena Mancini, the trainee, and you start becoming the ghost we need you to be. He led me from the living area, his hand a firm, inescapable pressure on the small of my back. We walked down a long white hallway that felt more like a sterile laboratory than a home. The only art on the walls were framed architectural blueprints of his skyscrapers, monuments to his visible empire. Rocco followed us, his silence a heavy, judgmental weight. The room he brought me to was not a bedroom, but an office dominated by a single immense oak desk. Behind it, a wall of monitors displayed a silent ballet of security feeds from across the city. He hadn't been watching the news. He had been watching everything. The woman you will become, Sergio began, his voice devoid of any warmth as he tapped one of the screens, was known only as L'Ombra, the shadow. She was our most valuable asset. A courier and a ghost. She had no name, no history, only a reputation for absolute discretion and an uncanny ability to navigate our world unseen. On the monitor, a grainy image appeared. A woman in a trench coat, her face obscured by a hat, and the rain-slicked Chicago night. She was my primary channel for communicating with associates like Dimitri, he continued. She was scheduled to receive the final payment details and transfer codes from him tonight. The Falcones intercepted and killed her 2 hours before she could meet me. They took what she was carrying, a ledger containing compromising information on their operations, information she was trading to me. He turned from the screen to face me, his eyes boring into mine. When you spoke that dialect, Dimitri, who was already on edge about the missing contact, assumed you were L'Ombra's replacement. A clumsy, unprofessional one. He thought I was testing him, playing a game. When I denied it, he assumed the worst, that I had been compromised and you were a Falcone agent. So he thinks I'm a spy, I whispered, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. He thinks you are the key to this entire mess, Sergio corrected. And Rocco, he glanced at his consigliere, thinks the same, which is why, from this moment on, you will have no contact with the outside world. Your phone is gone, your apartment is being scrubbed. Serena Mancini, the ambitious trainee, has vanished. She has been replaced by a ghost. Rocco stepped forward, placing a slim black laptop on the desk. This contains everything we know about L'Ombra, her mannerisms, her known contacts, her protocols. You have until tomorrow evening to learn it, every word, every gesture. Tomorrow evening? I choked out. That's not enough time. It is the time Dimitri has given us, Sergio stated flatly. You will meet him at a private gallery in the West Loop. You will give him a new set of codes which we will provide. You will retrieve the payment information, and you will walk away. You will be in his presence for no more than 5 minutes. And if he realizes I'm not her? A cold smile touched Sergio's lips. L'Ombra was a ghost. No one knew what she truly looked like. That is your only advantage. But Dimitri is not a fool. He will test you. His gaze hardened. Your performance must be perfect. The next 24 hours were a descent into a waking nightmare. I was a prisoner in that opulent fortress, a student in the most terrifying school imaginable. Rocco was my reluctant, hostile instructor. He drilled me on the contents of the dossier, his voice dripping with contempt. He taught me the subtle cant of the head Lombra used instead of a nod, the way she held her glass, the specific brand of Russian cigarettes she smoked as a signal. "Never make eye contact for more than 3 seconds," he snarled, circling me in the vast living room. Lombra was a professional. She knew that the eyes reveal everything. Look at his mouth, his hands, the door behind him. Always. Sergio was a less constant but more unnerving presence. He would appear silently, watching my sessions with Rocco from the shadows, his expression unreadable. He would correct my posture with a touch that sent a jolt of both fear and electricity through me. He drilled me on the dialect, forcing me to repeat the coded phrases, his voice a low murmur in my ear, correcting my pronunciation until it was flawless. "The intonation is wrong," he said, his hand on my jaw, tilting my head. "It is not a question, it is a statement of fact. You are not asking for passage, you are announcing your arrival. Say it again." During a brief break, as I stared out at the city lights that now felt a million miles away, he came to stand beside me. "Why?" I asked, my voice raw with exhaustion. "Why did you choose this? Why not just tell Dmitri the truth, that I was an accident?" "Because men like Dmitri do not believe in accidents," Sergio said, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "And because the Falcones have the ledger. Lombra's death was not just a message, it was a strategic victory for them. They believe they have crippled my intelligence network. They have become bold." He turned to me, the city lights reflecting in his storm-gray eyes. "I need to restore the illusion of Lombra. I need them to believe my ghost is still in play. Your performance will not only appease Dmitri, it will be a message to the Falcones that they have failed. I was not just a pawn in his game with the Russians. I was a weapon in his war with the Falcones. The test came without warning. I was in the middle of reciting a sequence of numbers to Rocco when 2 of Sergio's guards entered the room. They didn't speak. They simply grabbed me, their hands like vices on my arms, and began dragging me towards the hallway. Panic seized me. I looked wildly at Rocco, who watched with cold indifference, then to Sergio, who stood by the fireplace, his expression a mask of stone. "Sergio!" I cried out. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched as they pulled me, struggling, from the room. They threw me into a dark space, a closet or a small storeroom, and slammed the door. The lock clicked shut. I was plunged into absolute blackness, the scent of cedar and old paper filling my nostrils. I beat against the door, my voice hoarse from screaming his name, but no one came. Hours passed. There was no sound, no light, just the suffocating darkness and the frantic beating of my own heart. This was it. Rocco had won. This was my elimination. Just as I was about to succumb to a wave of hopeless despair, the lock clicked. The door swung open, revealing Sergio, silhouetted against the light of the hallway. I scrambled out, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. I stared at him, my eyes burning with tears of terror and rage. You bastard." "Lombra was captured once by the Falcones," he said, his voice calm, as if discussing the weather. "She was held for 12 hours in a shipping container. She did not make a sound. She did not give them anything. When our people found her, she was meditating." He looked down at my disheveled state, my tear-streaked face. "You lasted 4 hours, and you screamed." The cold, brutal calculation of it hit me. This was a lesson, a psychological torture session designed to break me. "You have the knowledge," he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly as he took in my trembling form. "But you do not have the control. Lombra was a ghost because nothing could touch her. Your fear, it is a liability. It will get you killed. It will get me killed." He reached out, and for a moment, I flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, his thumb gently wiped a tear from my cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender after such cruelty, that it broke something inside me. A sob escaped my lips. "You must become a fortress, Serena," he whispered, his voice for my ears only. "When you meet Dmitri, you cannot be the trainee from Bellagio. You cannot be the terrified woman I just pulled from that closet. You must be made of ice and steel. You must be Lombra. He held my gaze, his own eyes filled with a strange, fierce light. Survive this for me, and I swear on my family's name, no one will ever lock you in the dark again. Fan 4, something broke in me during those 4 hours in the suffocating darkness, but something else was forged in its place. The terror was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but it was no longer a paralyzing fog. It was a whetstone. My fear, my anger, my desperation, they were being sharpened into a single gleaming point of focus: survival. The remaining hours before the meeting were a blur of intense, dispassionate instruction. The cruelty of the test had been replaced by a chillingly professional focus. Rocco, seeing that I hadn't shattered, seemed to regard me with a new grudging respect. Like a soldier sizing up a weapon he didn't trust but was forced to use. He no longer snarled, he drilled. Dimitri will offer you a drink. You will refuse, Rocco instructed, his voice a dry rasp. Lombra never drank on the job. He will offer you a cigarette. You will accept, but you will use your own lighter, a silver Zippo with a faded engraving. Here. He slid the heavy, cold object across the table. I picked it up. An ornate F was engraved on the side. Falcone? I asked, my voice steady. A trophy, Rocco said with a thin smile. Lombra took it off one of their lieutenants before she made him disappear. A subtle message Dimitri will understand. Sergio oversaw the final transformation. Gone were my sensible trainee clothes, laid out on the bed in my new room, a space as beautiful and impersonal as a high-end hotel suite, was the uniform of a ghost. Black silk trousers that made no sound when I moved, a high-collared charcoal cashmere sweater, a tailored leather jacket that felt like a second skin, flat-soled boots that allowed for silence and speed. There was no color, no personality. It was the attire of someone designed to fade into the shadows, to be unforgettable in her presence, but impossible to recall in detail later. As I dressed, I felt the last vestiges of Serena Mancini being stripped away. I wasn't a daughter mourning her parents or a woman drowning in debt. I was a costume, a role, a lie waiting to be told. Sergio entered without knocking as I was fitting the tiny, flesh-colored earpiece into my ear. It felt alien, a violation. He held a small, heavy object in his palm, a Sig Sauer P365, compact and deadly. You know how to use one of these? He asked. I'm a doctor. I save lives. I don't... I trailed off, my throat dry. Lombra knew how, he said, ignoring my protest. He placed it in my hand. The weight of it was obscene. It's for emergencies only, a last resort. There's a single round in the chamber. You won't have time to do anything else. You put it to his head, and you pull the trigger, but if it comes to that, you have already failed. He took my hand and guided it, along with the gun, to a hidden holster sewn into the small of my back, beneath the jacket. His fingers were cold against my skin. It is a tool, nothing more. Its only purpose is to get you out of that room and back to me. The possessive undertone in his words, back to me, sent an involuntary shiver through me. The ride to the West Loop was silent. I sat in the back of the Escalade, sandwiched between Sergio and Rocco. The city lights smeared past the tinted windows, a world away from the cold, tense bubble inside the car. I focused on my breathing, on the weight of the Zippo in my pocket, on the cold steel pressed against my spine. I was a fortress. I was ice and steel. I was a lie. The gallery was a stark cube of concrete and glass, an island of sterile modernity in a neighborhood of decaying warehouses. It was closed to the public, the interior dark save for a single focused light in the center. Dimitri is inside, alone, he says, but assume he's lying, Sergio said, his voice a low murmur. His car is the only one on the street, but he will have snipers on the surrounding rooftops. My men are in position as well. This is a stalemate. The first person to flinch loses. He turned to me, his face half hidden in the shadows of the car. Once you are inside, you are on your own. I can speak to you, I can guide you, but I cannot save you. Only your performance can do that. Rocco handed me a slim burner phone. The codes are the last 5 images in the gallery. Memorize them, transmit them. Get the payment information and leave. I took the phone, my fingers feeling numb. This was real. This was happening. Sergio's hand covered mine, stilling its trembling. His touch was surprisingly warm. Serena. He waited until my eyes met his. Remember, Dmitri is not the true predator in that room. He is a scavenger who has stumbled into a lion's den. He is more afraid of the consequences of this meeting than you are. He fears the Falcones. He fears me. Project that. Let him feel the danger you represent, the power you are backed by. You are not a trainee asking for permission. You are Lombra, delivering a final offer. He released my hand, and the warmth was gone, leaving only a lingering chill. Go. I took a deep, shuddering breath. Ice and steel, a fortress. I stepped out of the car. The cold night air hit my face. The street was empty, silent, save for the distant wail of a siren and the rustle of wind through the derelict buildings. The gallery door was a slab of black, featureless steel. For a moment, my feet were rooted to the pavement. I couldn't do this. I was a doctor. I was Serena Mancini. Then, a voice in my ear. So clear, it was as if he were standing beside me. Sergio. The curtain is up, he whispered, his voice a ghost in my head. The performance begins now. Do not fail me. That was the push I needed. Failure was not an option. I walked towards the door, each step deliberate, my back straight, my chin high. I was not Serena. I was a shadow. I was Lombra. And I was walking into the lion's den. The steel door hissed open before I could touch it, revealing a cavernous, dark space. The gallery was a void. A cavern of polished concrete and suffocating silence. The only light came from a single, harsh spotlight in the center of the room, illuminating a massive, chaotic sculpture of twisted metal. The air was cold and smelled of dust and ozone. My footsteps, meant to be silent, echoed unnervingly in the vast space. Dmitri was waiting by the sculpture. He was not alone. Two figures, immense and silent, stood in the deep shadows behind him. So much for coming alone. He's lying already, Sergio's voice murmured in my ear, calm and cold. Note the exit to your left. Keep it in your line of sight. Proceed. I walked forward, my pace measured, my eyes scanning the room, just as Rocco had drilled me. I didn't look at Dmitri. I looked past him, at the sculpture, at the shadows, at the exit. I projected boredom, professionalism. I was a courier on a routine job. You are late, Dmitri said, his voice a low growl that scraped against the silence. I stopped 10 feet from him, the distance Lombra's file had specified. Never get within arm's reach. I didn't answer. Lombra didn't waste words. He gestured to a small table nearby, on which sat an open bottle of vodka and 2 glasses. A drink to warm the chill. I don't drink, I said, my voice coming out lower than usual, flatter. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like her. Good, Sergio's voice approved. Now wait for him to offer the cigarette. The Zippo is your first piece of theater. A flicker of annoyance crossed Dmitri's face. He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver cigarette case. A smoke, then. He offered the open case. I ignored it, pulling the heavy Zippo from my pocket. I flicked it open with my thumb, the metallic click and the flare of the flame shockingly loud in the silence. I lit my own cigarette, one of the Russian brand Rocco had given me, and took a slow drag, letting the smoke curl from my lips before snapping the lighter shut. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then looked away, letting my eyes drift to the engraved F on the lighter's surface. I saw Dmitri's eyes follow my gaze. I saw the flash of recognition, the subtle tensing of his jaw. He knew what the lighter meant. The first message had been delivered. Battaglia plays dangerous games, he said, putting his own case away. Sending someone new, someone I do not know. He is testing your nerve, Sergio whispered. Do not reply. Your silence is your power. Let him fill it. I remained silent, taking another drag from the cigarette. The silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. It became a battle of wills. I could feel Dmitri's frustration mounting, his suspicion warring with the reputation of the ghost he believed me to be. The Falcones have the ledger, he finally snapped, breaking first. They grow bold. They think Battaglia is weak. Now you speak, Sergio commanded. The line, word for word. My employer is not weak, I said, my voice cold and even. He is patient. He allows his enemies the rope to hang themselves. Dmitri studied me, his pale eyes narrowed. And the hardware? The deal? The deal proceeds, I said. My employer is a man of his word. But the terms have changed. The risk has increased. And so has the price. This was a new line. Sergio hadn't told me this. It was a bluff. For a heart-stopping moment, there was no voice in my ear. Just silence. I was off script, alone, my heart hammered against my ribs. Then Sergio's voice, low and laced with something that might have been admiration. Excellent. You are learning. Keep him off balance. Demand a 10% surcharge. 10%, I stated, my newfound confidence surprising even myself. For the inconvenience, and as a guarantee of your discretion. Dimitri stared at me, then threw his head back and laughed. A harsh barking sound that echoed through the gallery. 10%, Battaglia has nerve, I will give him that. And he has found a replacement for his old ghost with a spirit of her own. He grew serious again. The price is acceptable, on one condition. Here it comes, Sergio warned. The test. I need proof you are who you say you are, Dimitri said. Lombra carried a marker, a way to verify her identity beyond any doubt. Show it to me. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my fortress of ice. A marker. The dossier had said nothing of a marker. It was a detail Sergio didn't know. A trap. My mind raced, searching for an escape, an excuse. There was none. My cover was about to be blown. In the silence, I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Stall, Sergio's voice was urgent in my ear. Buy me time. Ask him what kind of marker. What marker? I asked, my voice tight. Dimitri smiled, a predator's smile. She would know. An old coin, a Sicilian grano from the 17th century. Show it to me now, or this meeting is over, and you will not be leaving this room. One of his men behind him shifted, and I caught the glint of steel. My hand instinctively twitched towards the gun, hidden at my back. It was over. I had failed. Do not reach for the gun. Sergio's voice was a blade in my ear. Listen to me, Serena. Very carefully, the coin, it's in the Zippo. The Zippo? My mind blanked. The bottom, he hissed. There's a false bottom. Rocco's trophy had a secret. Twist it, counterclockwise. Now. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, I raised the silver Zippo. My thumb fumbled against the smooth, cool metal. It felt solid, seamless. There was no bottom to twist. This was a trick, a final, cruel joke. Dimitri was watching, his smile widening. His man was taking a step forward. Then my thumb found it, a tiny, almost invisible seam. I twisted. The bottom of the lighter popped open on a hinge, and nestled inside, on a bed of worn velvet, lay a small, dark, ancient coin. I tipped it out into my palm and held it out to him, my face a mask of cold indifference I did not feel. The smile vanished from Dimitri's face, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. He stared at the coin, then back at my face, a new and genuine respect dawning in his pale eyes. I had passed the test. The ghost was real. Dimitri's disbelief melted into a grunt of satisfaction. He gestured for me to place the coin on the table, and I did, the small piece of metal making a soft, definitive click against the glass. The test was over. The performance, however, was not. Do not show relief. Sergio's voice was a sliver of ice in my ear. You expected this. You were insulted he even had to ask. Now the codes. Show him the phone. I pulled out the burner phone Rocco had given me. My fingers felt steady, disconnected from the frantic hummingbird trapped in my chest. With a few taps, I brought up the first of 5 images. A photograph of a seemingly random piece of graffiti on a crumbling brick wall. To me, it was meaningless. To Dimitri, it was the first key in a sequence that would unlock a shipment of unimaginable lethality. I held the phone out. Dimitri leaned in, his own device in hand, and scanned the image. He grunted again, then nodded. I swiped to the next image, and the next, a silent, tense ritual performed under the single, harsh spotlight. The entire time my eyes were on his hands, on the exit, on the shadows where his men lurked. I was a fortress. I was a ghost. After the 5th image was scanned, he straightened up. The codes are satisfactory. He slipped his device back into his coat. Now, for the payment. He was supposed to give me a drive, a piece of hardware. Instead, he remained still, a thoughtful, predatory look on his face. Something is wrong, Sergio's voice was sharp, urgent. He is deviating from the plan. Be ready. My associates in Moscow were displeased by the delay, Dmitri said slowly, choosing his words with care. The death of your predecessor, the appearance of a new face, it has created uncertainty. They require an additional show of good faith before the payment is transferred. My blood ran cold. This wasn't in the script. Keep him talking, Sergio ordered. Ask what he wants. What kind of good faith? I asked, my voice a blade of ice. My employer does not renegotiate. Dmitri smiled, a chillingly pleasant expression. This is not a renegotiation, it is a collateral adjustment. We know the Falcones have become a thorn in Battalia's side. We know they have a new safe house, a distribution hub for their narcotics operations, somewhere in the Pilsen district. Lombra, he said, his pale eyes pinning me in place, was known for her thoroughness. We are certain she would know the address. Give it to us. A small gift to cement our new friendship. I was standing on a landmine. The dossier had contained nothing about a safe house in Pilsen. This was a question I couldn't answer. My silence stretched. In my ear, I could hear nothing but the faint, almost imperceptible sound of Sergio's breathing. He was thinking, calculating an impossible equation. Giving up the address would be a major strategic loss, a sign of weakness to the Falcones. But refusing would confirm I was an imposter. Dimitri's men would open fire before I could even reach for the gun at my back. He has you, Sergio's voice was a strained whisper, tight with fury. The bastard has you pinned. There is no choice. A pause. I could almost feel the battle raging within him. Listen carefully. I am sending an address to your phone. It is one of their secondary locations. Not the main hub, but it is active. Giving it to him will hurt us, but it will keep you alive. Memorize it, then delete it. A notification pinged silently on the burner phone's screen. An address, 1844 South Throop Street. Repeat it in your head, he commanded. Now look at him. You are not giving him a gift. You are trading a minor asset for his continued loyalty. You are in control. I took a slow, deliberate drag from my cigarette, letting the smoke cloud my face for a second. I let a small, contemptuous smile play on my lips. You ask for a great deal, Dmitri, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. My employer does not share intelligence lightly. I paused, pretending to weigh the decision. But as a gesture of this new friendship, I can be persuaded. I recited the address, my voice even and clear. 1844 South Throop Street, an old bakery. They move product in the early morning, hidden in bread shipments. I watched him, saw his eyes light up with greed and triumph. He knew I had just given him something real, something valuable. He pulled a small, encrypted hard drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. The payment accounts and transfer routes, he said. It has been a pleasure doing business with you, Lombra. He gave a slight bow, a gesture of respect that felt like a victory. Get the drive and walk away, Sergio ordered. Do not run. Do not look back. I stubbed out my cigarette on the glass table, a small act of disrespect. I picked up the hard drive, its surface cold and smooth, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Without another word, without a glance back, I turned and walked towards the dark maw of the entrance. Every nerve in my body screamed. The sound of my own footsteps on the concrete was a countdown to a bullet in the back. The 10 yards to the door felt like a mile. My hand hovered near the small of my back, my fingers itching for the cold comfort of the gun. Steady, Sergio's voice was the only thing keeping me upright. You are in control. You are untouchable. Walk. The steel door hissed open as I approached. I stepped out into the cold Chicago night, and it hissed shut behind me, sealing the monster back in his cage. The Escalade glided to the curb the moment I was clear. The back door swung open. I didn't remember climbing in. I only remember the door shutting, the click of the lock a sound of absolute salvation. And then the fortress crumbled. A violent shudder racked my body. The air I had been holding rushed out of my lungs in a ragged gasp. The burner phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop the uncontrollable trembling. But it was useless. The ice had shattered. The steel had melted. I was just Serena again, and I was terrified. Rocco watched me from the opposite seat, his expression a mixture of surprise and disgust. But Sergio moved. He leaned forward, retrieved a bottle of water from a cooler, and opened it. He didn't speak. He simply pressed the cold bottle into my shaking hands. "Drink," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I drank, the cold water a shock to my system. I could feel his eyes on me, intense and analytical, but with something else mixed in. Relief. I finally looked up at him, my eyes burning. You could have gotten me killed." "I did not," he stated simply. He leaned back into the plush leather of his seat. "You performed flawlessly. You took a situation with no script and you improvised. You were not Lombra tonight, Serena. You were better." Rocco scoffed from his corner, but Sergio shot him a look that silenced him instantly. The praise did little to soothe the terror still vibrating through my soul, but it was a lifeline. He wasn't angry. I hadn't failed. "What now?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Now, boss, we have the payment information. Dimitri is satisfied for the moment, and the Falcones are about to have a very bad morning," Sergio said, a dangerous glint in his eyes. He picked up the burner phone from the floor, his expression unreadable as he turned it over in his hands. "That was your first performance," he said quietly, his gaze lifting to meet mine. The city light slid across his face, casting sharp shadows. "Your next one will be convincing the Falcones that their spies are useless, that Lombra is still alive and one step ahead of them." He leaned forward again, the space between us shrinking. "The war has just begun, and you are now my most important soldier." The ride back to the penthouse was a silent, suffocating journey through a city that no longer felt like mine. I was a ghost haunting the leather seats of a moving crypt, the hard drive in my pocket a cold, heavy testament to the life I had just stolen, even if it was only a temporary theft. Rocco sat in stony silence, his earlier contempt replaced by a watchful, calculating stillness. Sergio was on his phone, his thumb moving in a blur across the screen as he issued a series of silent, text-based commands that I knew were already reshaping the city's underworld. When the elevator doors opened into the penthouse, the scene was one of controlled, waiting tension. Men with earpieces and the same unnerving stillness as their leader were positioned discreetly throughout the space. My performance at the gallery hadn't ended the threat. It had merely changed its shape. "Take the drive to the tech team," Sergio said to Rocco, his voice returning to its default state of cold command. "I want every byte of data decrypted and cross-referenced with our existing files on Dimitri's network. I want to know where he sleeps, what he eats, and who he pays, by sunrise." Rocco took the drive from my still trembling hand, his fingers brushing mine. His keys, small and hard like chips of obsidian, met mine for a fraction of a second. "You were lucky, girl," he rasped, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "Luck runs out." He turned and disappeared down the hallway without a backward glance. "Ignore him," Sergio said, his attention focused on a tablet one of his men had handed him. "Rocco trusts only what he has seen. Tonight he saw a ghost. It will take him time to believe it." He led me not to the living area, but to his private study. It was a room paneled in dark, rich wood, lined floor to ceiling with books that looked ancient and well-read. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It was the first room in this entire fortress that felt like it belonged to a human being. He gestured to a deep leather armchair by the fire. "Sit." He walked to a polished mahogany bar, retrieving a bottle of wine, a bottle I recognized with a jolt. A Tignanello, 1997, a Super Tuscan legend. He opened it with the practiced, efficient hands of a man who appreciates fine things but is not enslaved by them. He poured 2 glasses, the deep ruby liquid catching the firelight. He handed one to me. "You earned this," he said, his voice a low murmur. I took the glass, the fine crystal a stark contrast to the cheap, mismatched mugs in my apartment. I swirled the wine, inhaling the complex aroma of black cherry, tobacco, and licorice. It was the scent of a life I had only ever served, never lived. "We need to debrief," he said, taking the chair opposite me. He was all business again, the brief flicker of humanity extinguished. "Your improvisation with the price increase was unexpected, but effective. It showed dominance. Dimitri respects that." "I thought you were going to let me die," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "When he asked about the coin, there was Silence. I was accessing the intel, he corrected, his voice flat. Rocco obtained the Zippo from a Falcone informant this afternoon. The coin was a last-minute discovery, a detail the informant failed to mention. I had to confirm its existence before I fed you the line. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes unblinking over the rim of the glass. For 3 seconds, your life depended entirely on the speed of my data connection. I do not enjoy such variables. The coldness of his admission was more terrifying than any threat. My life had been a variable, a calculation. Your reaction to the test in the closet was emotional, but your performance at the gallery was flawless, he continued, analyzing me like a specimen. You have a compartmentalization ability I've rarely seen in untrained civilians. When the pressure is absolute, you become what you need to be. That is useful. Useful, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. And what about the bakery? The men you just sacrificed to Dimitri? Is that useful too? His expression hardened. That bakery was a low-level distribution point the Falcones had already marked for abandonment. We have been watching it for weeks. The men inside were expendable. I gave Dimitri a piece of meat that was already rotting. It cost me nothing. In fact, a cruel smile touched his lips. It will now cause chaos in the Falcone ranks as they hunt for the traitor who gave up the address, a traitor who doesn't exist. It was a calculated loss that becomes a strategic gain. I stared into the fire, the wine in my glass untouched. He saw people as assets, lives as acceptable losses, and cruelty as a tool. I was in a world where the moral compass I had lived by my entire life didn't just point in a different direction. It didn't exist at all. So what now? I asked, my voice weary. Do I go back into a dark room until you need your ghost again? Now, he said, rising and walking to his desk. We plan the next phase. He picked up the encrypted hard drive, which Rocco must have delivered while we were talking. This is not just payment information. Lombra was a master of intelligence. She knew Dimitri would never give up clean data. This drive is a trap. A trap? It contains a sophisticated worm. Once my tech team decrypts it on a secure network, the worm will activate, believing it has reached its target. It will then begin transmitting Dimitri's entire financial network, his contacts, and his encrypted communications directly to us. By morning, I will own him. He looked at me, and I saw the mind of a grandmaster at work, always 3 moves ahead. Your performance tonight did not just save a deal. It delivered me the keys to the entire Russian operation in Chicago. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. I had been a pawn in a game so large I couldn't even see the edges of the board. The Falcones believe Lombra is dead, he went on, his voice filled with a new predatory energy. They are celebrating. They are growing careless. And that is when we will use you, not to make deals, but to feed them poison. He began to pace again, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face. You will become a rumor, a whisper in the dark. A ghost they thought they had exorcised now returned to haunt them. You will pass them information, my information, leading them into traps, setting them against each other, dismantling their empire from the inside out, brick by bloody brick. He stopped and looked at me, his eyes blazing with a cold, brilliant fire. Rocco was wrong. You are not a liability. You are the perfect weapon. You are a ghost they do not believe exists. He seemed to expect a response, but I had none. I was drowning. He had saved my life only to sentence me to another, more terrifying death, a death of the soul. He must have seen the despair on my face because his expression softened, the hard edges of the strategist giving way to something else, something more human. He walked back to the fireplace and stood looking down at me, the flames casting his shadow long and dark across the room. You asked me why I'm doing this, he said quietly, his voice losing its commanding edge. Beyond the promise, beyond strategy. I looked up at him, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. The Falcones, he said, his voice dropping, becoming tight with a long-buried rage. The man who leads them now, Marco Falcone, he killed my father. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and shocking in its simplicity. It was years ago, a truce meeting, a betrayal. My father was a man of honor, and he believed his enemies were the same. Marco shot him in the back while he was shaking his hand. He stared into the fire, But I knew he was seeing something else entirely. I was 22. I watched him bleed out on the marble floor of a restaurant not so different from Bellagio. And in that moment, I learned a lesson my father never did. Honor is a luxury, and trust is a weapon you only give to those you are willing to die for. He finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw past the monster, past the Mafia boss, and saw the man. I saw the 22-year-old boy forced to become a king, a ruler in a kingdom of shadows, his heart encased in ice. "This is not just business for me, Serena," he whispered, his voice thick with a pain he had carried for years. "This is vengeance. The Falcones took my past from me, and I will burn their future to the ground." He reached down, his fingers gently brushing a tear I didn't even know that had fallen from my eye. "And you are the fire I will use to do it." His confession fell into the silence between us, extinguishing all the air in the room. The fire in the hearth crackled, oblivious to the inferno he had just revealed in his soul. For the first time, the vast, terrifying scope of his world snapped into sharp, human focus. It wasn't about balance sheets or territory. It was about the ghost of a murdered father and the son who had sworn a blood oath to his memory. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw past the cold-blooded strategist. I saw a man forged in a crucible of grief and rage, a man who had wrapped himself in layers of power and ice to protect a wound that would never heal. And in that moment, a dangerous, unwelcome flicker of empathy sparked within me. I was his weapon, his tool of vengeance, but I was also the only person in the world who now knew the true name of his war. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words inadequate but all I had to offer. "About your father." The vulnerability vanished from his face as quickly as it had appeared. The mask of Sergio Battaglia, the untouchable leader, snapped back into place. He straightened up, turning away from me and the intimacy of the moment. "Sorrow is a useless emotion," he said, his voice once again cold and distant. "Vengeance is not." He walked to the bar and refilled his glass, the sound of the liquid splashing into the crystal, a sharp, final note to the conversation. "You need to rest. Your real training begins at dawn." And so began my new life. The penthouse, once a prison, became a training ground. My world shrank to the size of its marble floors and panoramic windows. Every day was a relentless cycle of transformation, designed to strip away the last remnants of Serena Mancini and forge the ghost, L'Ombre, in her place. Mornings were for the body. Rocco, with the grudging approval of his boss, became my tormentor. He wasn't a trainer, he was a deconstructionist. He taught me not how to fight, but how to disappear, how to move through a crowd like a whisper of wind. How to spot a tail in the reflection of a shop window, how to break a grip, create a moment's distraction and vanish. He pushed me until my muscles screamed and my lungs burned. There was no praise, only a recurring cynical mantra. "The dead are not lucky, girl. They are slow." Afternoons were for the mind. Sergio became my tutor, and his study became my classroom. He taught me the art of his war. He spread out maps of Chicago, marking them with the territories and interests of the Falcones. He walked me through their family tree, their alliances, their weaknesses. He made me memorize the faces of their captains, their enforcers, their informants. But it went deeper than that. He taught me to see the world as he did, as a complex web of transactions, leverage, and liabilities. We would spend hours dissecting the financial reports of their legitimate businesses, and he would show me how to find the telltale signs of money laundering, the ghost employees, the inflated invoices. My mind, which had once found beauty in the structure of a Dantean sonnet, was now being rewired to find it in the elegant brutality of a perfectly executed corporate takeover. "The Falcones are old money," he explained one afternoon, his finger tracing a line of suspicious transactions on a spreadsheet. "They are sentimental. They keep their ledgers close. They trust family above all. Their strength, their loyalty, is also their greatest weakness. We will not attack their soldiers. We will attack their family. We will attack their trust." In those sessions, a strange thing began to happen. The lines between captor and captive, between handler and asset, began to blur. We would argue. I would question his ruthless methods, bringing a doctor's ethics into a world that had none. He would counter with cold logic, pushing me to see the bigger picture, to accept the necessity of sacrificing a pawn to save a king. Our debates were sharp, intellectual, and in a twisted way, they were the most honest conversations I had ever had. He was the only one who didn't see me as a fragile woman, but as an intellect to be challenged, a mind to be sharpened. The nights were the hardest. The ghosts of my old life and the new ones I was collecting haunted my dreams. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom feeling of the dark closet closing in on me, my heart pounding with a fear I couldn't name. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself in his library, my hand tracing the spines of his leather-bound books. It was past 3 a.m. I thought I was alone until his voice came from the shadows. "You should be sleeping." I turned, startled. He was sitting in an armchair, a glass of something dark in his hand, the monitors on his desk casting a faint, flickering glow on his face. "I could say the same to you," I replied, my voice quiet. He didn't answer, just watched me. I felt that old, unnerving sensation of being seen, of my soul being laid bare under his gaze. "Does it get easier?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "Pretending to be someone else?" He was silent for a long moment. "You never pretend," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "You simply choose which part of yourself to reveal. Lombra's coldness, her control, that is inside you, Serena. I saw it at the hospital. I saw it at the gallery. I am not teaching you how to be someone else. I am teaching you how to unlock the part of yourself that knows how to survive in my world." He rose and walked over to me. He stopped so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You are not a victim in this story," he said, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. "You are the weapon, and it is time to see if you can be fired." The first mission came a week later. Sergio's tech team, having completely dismantled Dimitri's network, had found what they were looking for: the communication channel for a high-level informant inside the Falcone organization. But instead of extracting the informant, Sergio had a different plan. "The informant has been feeding us their movements for months," Sergio explained, pointing to a location on a digital map. "Tomorrow, the Falcones are moving an untraceable shipment of cash from one of their casinos to a new holding location. The informant has given us the route." "So you're going to intercept it?" I asked. "No," Sergio said, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "We are going to let it arrive safely, and then you are going to tell them that I knew about it, but let it go." I stared at him, confused. "Why? Why would I do that?" "Because," he said, "the fastest way to destroy an organization is to make them devour themselves. When you, as Lombra, leak the information that I knew about the route, Marco Falcone will come to only one conclusion. His trusted informant is now working for me. He will tear his own house apart looking for a traitor who is, in fact, still loyal to him." It was brilliant. And it was diabolical. The method for the leak was as subtle as the plan itself. I was not to meet anyone. I was to go to the Harold Washington Library Center, a place I used to frequent in my old life. I was to find a specific, obscure book of Calabrian poetry. Inside, I was to leave a small, encrypted microdot, no bigger than a period at the end of a sentence, on the 18th word of the 44th page. "The Falcone's dead drop is the library," Rocco explained, his tone clipped and professional. He handed me the tiny, almost invisible dot. "Their man checks that book every Tuesday at 3 p.m. You will place the dot, and you will leave. You will be in and out in less than 5 minutes." Walking into that library was the strangest, most terrifying moment yet. It was a piece of my old world, a sanctuary of quiet and knowledge, now tainted by the shadows of my new reality. Every person I passed, every librarian who smiled at me, felt like a potential threat. I found the book in a dusty, forgotten corner of the poetry section. My hands, encased in thin leather gloves, trembled as I opened it to the correct page. I found the word. With a pair of specialized tweezers, I placed the microdot. It was done. I walked out of the library, my heart pounding, and got into the back of a waiting town car. It sped away, disappearing into the river of Chicago traffic. That night, the penthouse was a command center. Sergio, Rocco, and I stood in his study, watching a dozen silent surveillance feeds. One was focused on a nondescript Italian social club in Little Italy, Marco Falcone's headquarters. We waited. The hours ticked by. 3 p.m. came and went, then 4 p.m., nothing. Maybe their man was delayed, Rocco muttered, his voice tight with tension. Or maybe they smelled a trap, I whispered, a cold dread seeping into me. If I had failed, if I had been spotted. Patience, Sergio said, his eyes never leaving the main screen. He was unnervingly calm, a statue amidst our anxiety. Then, at 5:17 p.m., a flurry of activity. Several black cars pulled up to the social club. Men with grim faces got out and stormed inside. A few minutes later, they dragged a man out. I recognized his face from the profiles Sergio had made me study. It was Antonio Gallo, the Falcone informant. Marco Falcone's own cousin. They threw him into the trunk of a car. The convoy sped off. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It had worked. They had taken the bait. I looked at Sergio. He was watching the screen, a faint, cold smile on his lips, as he watched his enemy begin to self-destruct. He had just sentenced a man to death without ever lifting a finger. He turned his head and his eyes met mine. The smile vanished, replaced by that intense, unreadable expression. He didn't offer praise. He didn't need to. In his eyes, I saw the confirmation of my new reality. The weapon had been fired, and it had hit its mark. The successful strike against the Falcones marked a shift in the penthouse's atmosphere. The air, once thick with the tension of a single, impending mission, now hummed with the low-grade electricity of an ongoing war. My existence became a strange paradox of luxury and lethality. By day, I was a scholar of espionage, my mind a sponge for the dark arts of psychological warfare. By night, I was a ghost, a whisper dispatched into the city to deliver chaos wrapped in secrets. My missions grew in complexity. I left a doctored shipping manifest in a locker at Union Station that sent a Falcone narcotics shipment directly into the hands of a waiting police task force. A task force tipped off by an anonymous donation from one of Sergio's charitable foundations. I used the burner phone to send a single, untraceable text that sowed suspicion between Marco Falcone and his most loyal captain, a man who was dead by morning, executed by his own paranoid boss. Each successful mission chipped away another piece of the Falcone empire and another piece of the woman I used to be. The fear never vanished, but it changed. It was no longer the frantic terror of a cornered animal, but the cold, sharp focus of a hunter. I was becoming the fortress Sergio had demanded. I was becoming L'Ombra. And as I changed, so did my relationship with my captor. Our late-night sessions in his study became less like briefings and more like councils of war. He would lay out the raw intelligence, and I would help him weave it into a narrative, a poisoned story to feed his enemies. My insights, born from a mind trained to analyze literature and human motivation, proved surprisingly effective. I could predict a character's actions, and it turned out the vain, greedy men of the Falcone family were as predictable as any villain in a Shakespearean tragedy. One night, hunched over a satellite map of a Falcone warehouse, I pointed to a blind spot in their camera coverage. "They're overconfident here," I murmured, tracing a path with my finger. "They assume no one would be foolish enough to try a direct approach, but a single operative, entering from the river, they would never see it coming." Sergio looked from the map to me, and for a moment, the strategist in his eyes was eclipsed by something else, something deeper. "You see the board with a clarity I have not encountered before," he said quietly. It was in these moments, in the shared intimacy of plotting destruction, that the lines blurred. He was no longer just my handler. He was my partner, the only other person awake with me in the dead of night, fighting the same war. Sometimes I would fall asleep at the desk, surrounded by files and maps, only to wake up with a cashmere blanket draped over my shoulders and a fresh cup of coffee waiting for me. He never acknowledged these small acts of care, and I never asked. They were a silent language we were developing, a language of shared purpose in a world of isolation. Rocco, too, began to change. His open hostility morphed into a grudging, professional respect. He still watched me with suspicion, but now it was the suspicion of a veteran soldier for a new unorthodox weapon that somehow keeps hitting its mark. He even began to offer his own brutal brand of advice. "When you are on the street, you are prey," he told me one evening as he drilled me on spotting a tail. "But prey survives by knowing the hunter better than he knows himself. Falcone's men are arrogant. They look for weakness. Your greatest defense is to project absolute, unshakable purpose. Walk as if you own the ground beneath your feet, and they will hesitate, believing you are a trap. But the more successful we became, the more dangerous the game grew. A cornered animal is the most vicious. Marco Falcone, watching his empire crumble from 1,000 invisible cuts, was no fool. He was bleeding, and he was hunting for the source. The news came on a cold November morning. Sergio, Rocco, and I were in the study, reviewing surveillance from the previous night. "We have a problem," Sergio said, his voice flat. He enlarged a photo on the main screen. It was a grainy shot of a man in a trench coat, but the face was clear. "This is Leo the Weasel Carbone, a freelance information broker. He makes a living digging up secrets others want buried." Another image appeared. Carbone handing a file to a known Falcone captain in a discreet meeting. "What's in the file?" I asked, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. Sergio's jaw was tight. "Carbone specializes in disappearances. He finds people who don't want to be found." He brought up a third image, a close-up of the file's cover. It was blurry, but the name, typed in stark black letters, was perfectly, horrifyingly clear. Serena Mancini. Rocco swore, a low, vicious sound. "They know. They're looking for the trainee from Bellagio." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. My old life, the one I had been forced to abandon, was now a trail of breadcrumbs leading my executioners directly to my door. "How?" I whispered. "How could they connect me to this?" "Carbone is the best," Sergio said, his voice a low growl of fury. "A missing person report that was never filed. A student loan of nearly $500,000 that vanished overnight. An apartment abandoned. He's a dog who has caught a scent. And he will not let it go." He turned to me, his eyes blazing with a protective fire that was more terrifying than his anger. "Your past is no longer your own, Serena. It is now their hunting ground." The world beyond the penthouse windows, once a symbol of a life I'd lost, now became a map of threats. Every street corner, every familiar landmark from my past, was a potential ambush point. The name Serena Mancini was no longer a ghost. It was a beacon, and the Falcones were moths drawn to its deadly light. The penthouse transformed from a base of operations into a fortress under siege. The security detail doubled. Rocco's hawk-like gaze seemed to be everywhere at once. My missions outside the walls stopped completely. The ghost was grounded. I had never felt more like a prisoner, not even in the first few days. Before, it had been a cage to keep me in. Now, it was a cage to keep the world out. The Falcones, unable to find me, began to attack my past. My old landlord called the police, reporting that men with Falcone tattoos were asking about me, offering cash for information. A former colleague from the hospital was followed home, his car tires slashed as a warning. Each report, delivered to me by Sergio with a grim, controlled fury, was a knife twisting in my gut. I was a disease, and everyone I had ever known was at risk of infection. One evening, after learning they had visited my parents' graves, I finally broke. "This has to stop," I pleaded with Sergio, cornering him in his study. "These are innocent people. You have to let me go. If I disappear for real, they'll stop looking." "And go where?" he demanded, his voice dangerously soft as he stepped into my space, backing me against a wall of books. "Do you think there is a place on this earth Marco Falcone cannot reach if he is motivated? Your disappearance would be a starting gun, not a solution. He would tear your old life apart piece by piece, hoping one of the screams would be loud enough for you to hear." "So what do we do?" I cried, my voice cracking. "We just wait here while he terrorizes everyone I've ever known?" "No," he said, his hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek in a gesture that was both comforting and possessive. "We do not wait, we hunt." His eyes burned with a cold, righteous fury. "He has made this personal. He has targeted the innocent. He has broken the rules. He has reminded me of what he did to my father." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. "And for that, I will not just dismantle his empire. I will erase it." His war of vengeance had found its focal point. It was no longer an abstract quest for justice. It was a crusade to protect me. And that realization terrified me more than anything else. The plan he devised was audacious, elegant, and breathtakingly dangerous. It was a final, all-or-nothing move. "We cannot wait for Marco to find us," Sergio explained, his voice low and steady as he, Rocco, and I stood around a holographic map of the city. "We must draw him out. We will set a trap, and we will use the one thing he cannot resist as bait." "Money, territory?" Rocco guessed. "No," Sergio said, his eyes finding mine across the table. "Something far more valuable. History, legacy." He pointed to a location on the map, a place I didn't recognize. "This is the old St. Michael's Cathedral, deconsecrated and abandoned for 50 years. It is also where my father and his father held their first meetings. It is the symbolic heart of the Battaglia legacy." "It's a fortress," Rocco mused. "One way in, one way out, easily defended. And it is where Marco Falcone believes my father hid his most valuable secret," Sergio continued. "The Libro d'Onore, the Book of Honor, a ledger detailing every promise, every betrayal, every secret deal our family has made for 3 generations. It contains enough information to destroy every major family in the city, including his own." "Does this book actually exist?" I asked. A faint smile played on Sergio's lips. "It does, and it is currently in a vault in Zurich. But Marco doesn't know that." He looked at me, his expression turning deadly serious. "You, as Lombra, will leak one final piece of information. A whisper that you have found the location of the Libro d'Onore and are planning to retrieve it tonight. You will name St. Michael's as the location. Marco's greed and his desire to finally possess my family's secrets will be too great to ignore. He will not send his men. He will come himself." "He will come to kill her and take the book," Rocco stated flatly. "He will come to try," Sergio corrected. "My men will be in position. We will neutralize his security and capture him. This war ends tonight." The silence in the room was heavy. The plan was brilliant, but it placed me at the absolute center of the storm. I would be the cheese in the mousetrap. Sergio walked over to me, his face unreadable. He did not command me. He did not order me. For the first time, he asked, "Marco will only believe the information is real if the ghost he has been hunting appears in person. He will expect Lombra to be there. He will expect you," he said, his voice quiet. "This is not a mission I can order you to undertake, Serena. The risk is absolute, but it is the only way to end this, to cut the head off the snake and free yourself, and everyone you care about, from this war." He held my gaze. "The choice is yours." This was it. The culmination of everything, the months of training, the nights of fear, the strange, dangerous bond that had formed between us in the crucible of his vengeance. He was offering me a choice, but we both knew there was only one path forward. I could not spend the rest of my life as a ghost, hiding in his penthouse. The only way to be free was to walk through the fire. I looked from Sergio's intense, waiting face to Rocco's grim, stoic one. I was no longer the terrified trainee from Bellagio. I was not even the trembling imposter who had faced Dimitri. I was the weapon he had forged me to be. I met Sergio's gaze, my own clear and steady. The fortress was no longer a pretense. It was real. "I'll do it." The air inside St. Michael's Cathedral was cold and heavy, with the scent of decaying stone and forgotten prayers. Moonlight streamed through the shattered stained glass windows, painting ghostly patterns on the dusty floor. It was a tomb, a perfect setting for the end of a war. I stood alone at the altar, a small dark figure in the cavernous space. I was the bait, but I was not helpless. The familiar weight of the Sig Sauer was at the small of my back. A tiny razor-sharp blade was concealed in the heel of my boot, and in my ear, the steady, calm presence of Sergio's voice. "He is approaching from the north. 2 vehicles, 6 men plus Marco," Sergio murmured. "Just as we predicted. My teams are in position. Remember the plan. Let him come to you. Your only job is to keep him talking until I give the signal." The massive oak doors at the far end of the nave groaned open, the sound echoing like a death rattle through the church. Silhouetted against the night sky, Marco Falcone entered, flanked by his men. They moved with a predatory confidence, fanning out to secure the space, their weapons drawn. Marco walked down the central aisle, his footsteps crunching on fallen plaster. He was older, smaller than I expected. But he carried an aura of immense reptilian coldness. He stopped 20 feet from the altar, his dark eyes fixing on me. Lombra, he said, his voice a dry rustle. The ghost, I must admit, I am disappointed. I expected someone more. He is trying to unnerve you, Sergio whispered. Do not let him. You are in control. You were expecting a man? I asked, my voice cool and even, amplified slightly by the church's acoustics. That is the mistake you all make. Marco's thin lips tightened. You have been a considerable nuisance, costing me time, money, and loyal men, all for a dead family's ledger. He gestured around the derelict church. Is it here, the Battaglia Book of Secrets? It is, I lied, my heart pounding a steady, cold rhythm against my ribs. And it is everything you imagine, every betrayal your father committed, every weakness in your own organization. It is a legacy of filth, Falcone. And it is now mine to command. Rage flashed in his eyes. You dare. I dare. I cut him off, taking a step forward. I dare because you are a relic, a dinosaur clinging to traditions of backstabbing and brute force. Sergio Battaglia, he is the future, and you are about to become the past. The signal is vengeance. Sergio's voice was tight in my ear. He is getting agitated. Keep him focused on you. He is proud. Attack his pride. You talk of the future, Marco sneered, but you are merely a puppet, a doctor's daughter playing spy. Did you really think you could challenge me? Did he really think he could hide behind a woman? He took another step, raising a hand. It was a signal. From the shadowy choir loft above, 2 more of his men appeared. Their rifles trained on me. A cold dread washed over me. Sergio's teams were outside. We hadn't anticipated men inside. The trap was compromised. Serena, abort! Sergio's voice was a roar in my ear. Get out of there now! But there was nowhere to go. It seems you are the one who has been trapped, Ghost, Marco said with a triumphant smile. Now give me the book, and I may grant you a quick death. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the darkness behind the main doors. She is not the one who is trapped, Marco. Sergio. He stepped into the moonlight, alone, his hands empty at his sides. He was breaking his own protocol, exposing himself. Battaglia, Marco spat, his attention snapping to his true enemy. A fool, just like your father, coming here alone. I am not alone, Sergio said calmly. As he spoke, silent, black-clad figures descended on ropes from the ruined ceiling, dropping into the shadows behind Falcone's men. At the same time, the main doors slammed shut, and more of Sergio's team appeared, boxing them in. The hunters had become the hunted. Chaos erupted. The church became a maelstrom of gunfire and shouting. I dove behind the stone altar as bullets chipped away at the marble. In the midst of the maelstrom, I saw Marco Falcone, his face a mask of fury, raising his pistol, not at Sergio, but at me. I was the cause of this humiliation. His final act would be to erase me. I fumbled for the gun at my back, but I knew I would be too late. A blur of motion, Rocco. He appeared from nowhere, tackling Marco from the side just as he fired. The shot went wild, shattering a statue of a saint. Rocco and Marco went down in a tangle of limbs. I saw Rocco drive a blade into the older man's side, but not before Marco fired his gun again, the sound deafeningly close. Rocco grunted, his body going limp on top of Falcone. He had saved me. The man who had wanted me dead had just given his life for me. The firefight was over as quickly as it began. Sergio's men were ruthlessly efficient. They moved through the church, securing the remaining wounded Falcone soldiers. I scrambled over to where Rocco lay. His eyes were open, glazed with pain, a dark stain spreading across his chest. I ripped open his shirt. A sucking chest wound. My doctor's instincts took over. Pressure, I yelled to a nearby guard. Get me a med kit now. Sergio was kneeling beside me, his face grim. Rocco. He's alive, I said, pressing my hands against the wound, the familiar, sticky warmth of blood covering them. But we have to get him to a hospital, now. Sergio looked at Marco Falcone, who was groaning on the floor, wounded but alive, his men securing his hands. For a moment, I saw a terrible, cold fire in Sergio's eyes. The vengeance he had sought for years was at his feet, helpless. He could end it right now, pull the trigger, and fulfill the promise he had made to his father's ghost. He looked from Falcone's pathetic form to Rocco, gasping for breath, and then to me, my hands covered in his friend's blood. He saw the war he had created, the cost of it, laid bare on the stone floor of the church. And he made a choice. He turned away from his father's murderer. "Get him out of here," he commanded his men, his voice thick with emotion. "Get them both out of here." He looked at me. "Save him, Serena." It was not a command. It was a plea. The war ended not with a bang, but with the sterile, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. For 2 days, I did not leave Rocco's side. I was not L'Ombre, not a weapon, not a ghost. I was a doctor again. I assisted in the surgery, I monitored his recovery, I fought for his life with a ferocity that surprised even the seasoned hospital staff Sergio had bought out for our private use. On the 3rd day, Rocco opened his eyes. He looked at me, his gaze clear. "The girl," he rasped. "She has honor." He closed his eyes again, but he was breathing steadily. He would live. The Falcone Empire imploded. With Marco captured and the Libro d'Onore, the real one, retrieved from Zurich, anonymously delivered to the FBI, the entire organization was decapitated. The city's underworld was in chaos. But it was a chaos Sergio now completely controlled. His vengeance was complete, not with a bullet, but with the quiet, devastating force of justice. A week later, Sergio took me away from the city. We drove for hours, ending up at a modern house of glass and cedar, nestled on the shores of Lake Michigan, surrounded by a forest of silent, ancient pines. The air here was clean, quiet, and free. He led me to a deck overlooking the water, where the setting sun painted the sky in strokes of orange and violet. "It's over," he said, his voice quiet. "Marco Falcone will spend the rest of his life in a federal prison. His organization is finished. You are safe." He handed me a leather portfolio. Inside was a passport with a new name, a plane ticket to Florence, Italy, and the deed to a small, beautiful villa in the Tuscan hills. There were also the account details for a bank account containing a sum of money so large it seemed unreal. "You are free, Serena," he said, his gaze steady, but I could see the effort it cost him. "You can have your life back, a new life. No one will ever bother you again. You can study art, drink wine, read poetry. You can forget any of this ever happened." I looked at the documents, at the promise of a peaceful, easy life they represented, the life the old Serena Mancini would have wept with gratitude for. But I was not that woman anymore. I had walked through the fire and been remade. I closed the portfolio and set it aside. "My old life is gone, Sergio," I said, turning to face him. "The woman who wanted that life doesn't exist anymore. You killed her when you locked her in that closet. And you gave birth to someone new when you trusted her to save your life." I stepped closer to him, reaching up to touch the faint scar on his cheek. "You showed me a world of shadows, but you also showed me a strength inside myself I never knew I had. A quiet life alone, pretending none of this was real. That's not freedom. That's just another kind of cage." He was silent, his storm-gray eyes searching mine, his heart in his gaze for the first time. "So what do you want?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to be your ghost anymore," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I don't want to be your weapon. I don't want to be your soldier." I took a breath. "I want to be your partner. Let me help you build your empire, not just rule it. Let me be the one who stands beside you, not behind you." In the light, a slow smile spread across his face, a genuine smile that transformed him, chasing away the last of the shadows. He pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me with a possessive, tender strength. "I once told you that trust is a weapon you only give to those you are willing to die for," he murmured into my hair. "I know," I whispered back. "I was wrong," he said, pulling back to look at me, his eyes full of a raw, fierce emotion that took my breath away. "It's the one thing you give to the person you cannot live without." He kissed me then, and it was not a kiss of strategy or ownership. It was a kiss of homecoming, a promise, a beginning. We stood on that deck for a long time, watching the last light of day fade and the stars begin to appear in the clear, dark sky. The war was over, but I knew our story was just beginning. And for the first time, as I stood wrapped in the arms of the most dangerous man I had ever known, in a world I had never asked for, I felt completely and utterly safe. I was home.